AITA for charging my sister's family to stay in my house during Christmas. I 31 female recently bought my dream home after working hard for over a decade. This wasn't something that just fell into my lap. I've been busting my butt at work, sacrificing weekends, saving every penny I could, and being super careful with my finances to make this dream a reality. When I finally closed on it, I was over the moon. It's a beautiful 4-bedroom house with a huge backyard and even a pool, something I never thought I'd have. It feels surreal every time I walk through the door. I'm single and live alone, so it might seem like overkill to some people, but I love the extra space. I've turned one of the bedrooms into a home office, another into a guest room, and the last one into a gym. It's not just a house to me, it's my sanctuary. Now, with the holidays around the corner, my sister, Anna 35 female, and her family come into the picture. Anna is married to Rob, and together they have 3 kids, a 7-year-old boy who is bursting with endless energy, a 5-year-old girl who loves to touch and rearrange everything she sees, and a 3-year-old boy who is, for lack of a better word, a tiny human wrecking ball. They live out of state, so I don't see them often, usually just a couple of times a year, mostly around the holidays. It's always a mix of excitement and trepidation when they visit. I love my sister and her family, truly, but their energy and lifestyle couldn't be more different from mine. So when Anna called me last week and asked if she, Rob, and the kids could stay at my place for Christmas, I wasn't entirely sure how to feel. Her reasoning made sense at first. Traveling with 3 kids is expensive, and they didn't want to blow their holiday budget on a hotel. She mentioned how much they were looking forward to spending Christmas with the family, and since my house has so much space, they figured it would be the perfect setup. In her words, "We won't be in your way at all. The kids will love your backyard, and it'll be nice for us all to be under one roof." I'll admit, the idea of having a full house sounded charming in theory. I mean, it's Christmas. A time for family, laughter, and making memories. Plus, my house is big enough that everyone could have their own space. Initially, I didn't think much of it and said I'd consider it. But as I hung up the phone, the memories of the last time they stayed with me came rushing back, uninvited and all too vivid. It was a weekend visit just a year ago, and it was an experience that still makes my eye twitch when I think about it. During that visit, their kids turned my house into what can only be described as a disaster zone. My living room, which I had painstakingly decorated with cozy furniture and a neutral aesthetic I'm so proud of, became their personal playroom within minutes of their arrival. Crayons and markers appeared out of nowhere, and before I could stop them, they were scribbling all over my light gray sofa. I remember standing there, frozen in disbelief, as bright blue and green streaks stained the fabric. They didn't stop there. Juice was spilled on my pristine white rug, creating a bright red blotch that I couldn't salvage despite multiple attempts to clean it. That rug had to be replaced entirely, and it wasn't cheap. The crumbs were everywhere. Everywhere. It was as if the kids made it their mission to leave a trail in every room they entered. I found crushed crackers between the couch cushions, sticky candy wrappers on my coffee table, and even a stray apple slice under the dining room table. They pulled cushions off chairs, threw toys around, and managed to spread their chaos into rooms I didn't even think they'd enter. My kitchen, my guest room, my home office, nothing was spared. I spent hours cleaning after they left, scrubbing marker stains, vacuuming the endless debris, and putting everything back where it belonged. What truly upset me, though, wasn't just the mess but Anna's reaction when I brought it up. I had hesitantly mentioned the sofa and the rug, hoping for at least an acknowledgement of the damage. Instead, she waved it off with a laugh and said, "Kids are kids." That was it. No apology, no offer to replace or even help cover the cost of the ruined items, nothing. She acted like it was just par for the course when kids are involved, as if I should have expected it and been fine with it. Meanwhile, Rob was little to no help the entire time. He sat back and let the kids run wild, occasionally offering a half-hearted, "Don't do that," but never actually stepping in to manage them or clean up their messes. I felt like a maid in my own home, spending my weekend running around picking up after 3 little tornadoes and 2 adults who should have known better. By the end of that visit, I was exhausted. Not just physically, but emotionally too. So, when Anna asked to stay again this year, I hesitated. I didn't want to say yes right away because the memories of last year were still fresh in my mind, and the idea of going through that chaos again made my stomach churn. At the same time, I didn't want to come across as the bad guy who says no to family, especially around the holidays. Christmas is supposed to be about love and togetherness, and part of me felt guilty even entertaining the thought of saying no. But I knew I couldn't just ignore what had happened the last time they stayed. I needed to protect my space and my sanity. So, I told her I'd think about it, hoping that I could come up with a solution that felt fair for everyone. After a lot of thought, I decided that if I was going to open my home to them again, there needed to be some boundaries this time. I wasn't going to let history repeat itself without at least trying to prevent the kind of chaos I dealt with last year. That's when I came up with what I thought was a practical and reasonable plan. I typed up what I jokingly referred to as a house guest agreement, outlining a few basic conditions for their stay. It wasn't anything outrageous or over the top, just a way to ensure that their visit wouldn't leave me physically and financially drained. The first condition was a $100 cleaning fee up front. This wasn't meant to be punitive or excessive, but the reality is that 3 young kids and 2 adults staying in my house for several days would inevitably mean extra cleaning for me after they left. I wanted to be prepared for the sticky fingerprints on every surface, the crumbs in every crevice, and the general wear and tear that seems to follow Anna's family wherever they go. It felt fair to ask for a small fee to cover the deep cleaning I'd likely need to do once they were gone. The second condition was that they agree to cover any damages immediately. This was a big one for me, considering how last year's visit had cost me hundreds of dollars in repairs and replacements. The marker-stained sofa and juice-drenched rug were still fresh in my memory, and I wasn't about to let something like that happen again without safeguards in place. I wasn't asking for anything unreasonable, just a commitment that if something was broken or ruined, they'd take responsibility for it. After all, it's not like I'm made of money, and this house represents years of hard work and sacrifice. The third condition was a $50 per night fee for utilities. This one might sound nitpicky to some, but the reality is that winter utilities are expensive. With 5 extra people in the house, including 3 kids who love to take baths, leave lights on, and open the fridge 100 times a day, I knew my heating, water, and electricity bills would skyrocket. Again, I wasn't trying to profit off them, this was just to cover the extra costs I'd be taking on during their stay. Plus, $50 a night is still a fraction of what they'd pay for a hotel, so I felt this was a reasonable compromise. When I looked over the agreement, I felt good about it. To me, it seemed like a fair and logical solution that addressed the issues from last year while still allowing them to stay with me for the holidays. I wasn't trying to be difficult or unwelcoming, I was just trying to protect myself and my home from the stress and expenses I'd already experienced once before. It wasn't about being greedy or stingy, it was about setting boundaries so that I could enjoy Christmas, too, without feeling like my house was being taken over and destroyed. Well, let's just say Anna did not take it well. The second she received the agreement, my phone rang almost immediately. I barely got out a hello before she started in on me, her tone already heated. She accused me of being greedy, saying I was treating her family like Airbnb guests rather than loved ones. She was incredulous, asking me how I could even think to charge her for staying at my house during the holidays. "It's Christmas," she practically shouted. "The season of giving. And here you are, putting a price tag on spending time with your own family." Her words were sharp, and it was clear she was deeply offended. I could almost picture her on the other end of the line, pacing around her kitchen, gesturing wildly as she vented her frustration. I tried to stay calm and explain my perspective. I reminded her of what happened during their visit last year, of the chaos, the mess, and the damage that cost me hundreds of dollars to fix. I told her I wasn't trying to be cruel or make her feel unwelcome, but I needed to protect my home and my peace of mind. I even pointed out that $50 per night was nothing compared to what they'd pay for a hotel. "You just went on a Disney trip," I said, trying to stay diplomatic. "I know you can afford this. It's just a small way to ensure things don't get out of hand again." But nothing I said seemed to get through to her. She was stuck on the idea that I was being selfish and unfair, completely ignoring the reasoning behind my decision. "We're family," she kept saying, her voice dripping with indignation. "Family doesn't charge each other for these kinds of things." I could feel my frustration rising as I listened to her, but I bit my tongue. I didn't want to escalate the situation, so I tried again to calmly explain that this wasn't about money, it was about boundaries and respect. Still, she wasn't having it. To her, it was black and white, I was putting money above family, and that was unforgivable in her eyes. Then, to make matters worse, she dragged our parents into it. I found out later that she called them almost immediately after our conversation, clearly still fuming, and told them her side of the story. Of course, she painted me as the villain, the cold-hearted little sister who cared more about her fancy new house than about her own family. And, of course, our parents took her side. It wasn't long before my mom called me, her tone heavy with disappointment. "It's just a few days," she said, as if that magically erased everything I went through last year. How bad could it be? That comment hit me like a punch to the gut. It felt like she was completely dismissing my experience, brushing aside the stress, the mess, and the financial burden I'd already dealt with. To her, it was just a few minor inconveniences that I should be willing to endure for the sake of family. The more my mom talked, the more frustrated I became. She accused me of being cold-hearted and unreasonable, echoing Anna's sentiments almost word for word. She brought up how hard it is for Anna and Rob to travel with 3 kids and how I should be more understanding. "You have so much space," she said. "It's not like you'll even notice they're there." I almost laughed at the absurdity of that statement. Not notice they're there. Last year, they turned my house into a disaster zone in less than 48 hours. There was no way I'd be able to ignore the chaos this time around, especially with them staying for several days instead of just a weekend. And it didn't stop with my mom. Anna made sure to tell other family members about my so-called outrageous demands, and soon I started getting texts and calls from cousins and relatives chiming in with their opinions. Some were subtle, with comments like, "Hey, don't let holiday stress get to you. It's all about family," while others were more direct, "It's Christmas, lighten up," and "family is more important than money." It was like they all assumed I was being petty and stingy, completely ignoring the context of what happened last year and why I felt the need to set boundaries in the first place. On the flip side, a few of my close friends, the ones who actually knew the full story, were firmly in my corner. One of them even told me I was being too nice by not just outright saying no to Anna's request. "She took advantage of you last time, and now she's trying to guilt you into letting it happen again," my friend said bluntly. "You have every right to protect your home." While their support was reassuring, it didn't do much to stop the storm brewing within my family. The divide was growing, and I could feel the tension building with every phone call and message. It felt like no matter what I did, I'd be painted as the villain in someone's story. I don't know. Maybe I am being too harsh. But at the same time, this is my house. I worked hard for it, and I don't think it's fair for me to have to put up with chaos and damage just because we're family. I also know Anna well enough to know that if I don't set boundaries now, this will just keep happening every time they visit. For those wondering, I spent at least $500 replacing the sofa and rug after their last visit, and Anna didn't offer a single cent to help. I also ended up spending hours cleaning up the mess they left behind. That's not something I want to deal with again, especially not during the holidays. So, am I the asshole for setting these conditions? Or am I right to want to protect my home and my peace of mind? Update. The fallout from the initial phone call with Anna and the subsequent intervention by our parents left me feeling emotionally drained, but I was determined to hold my ground. I knew my boundaries were reasonable, and I refused to let guilt push me into compromising my peace again. I thought the dust might settle after a few days, that maybe Anna would cool off and realize that what I was asking for wasn't outrageous. But instead of calming down, she decided to escalate the situation even further. A few days later, Anna called me again. Her tone was notably different this time, not as fiery as before, but dripping with a kind of performative patience that set me on edge right away. She started the conversation by acting like the previous argument hadn't even happened. "I still don't understand why this is such a big deal," she said, in a tone that was equal parts condescending and dismissive. She went on to explain, again, how difficult it was to travel with 3 kids and how my house was the obvious choice for their Christmas visit. "The kids are just kids," she said, as if that somehow justified the destruction they'd caused the last time. "They're not trying to ruin anything, they're just being themselves. You can't expect them to sit quietly on the couch and not touch anything. That's just not realistic." She kept talking, piling on her excuses and justifications, but I was already tuning her out. My patience was wearing thin, and I could feel the frustration bubbling up as I waited for her to finish. When she finally paused, I calmly reminded her of last year's visit, detailing all the damage and chaos her kids had caused, the money I had to spend on repairs and replacements, and the stress of cleaning up after them. I told her, again, that I wasn't willing to go through that a second time without some kind of assurance that it wouldn't happen again, and without her taking responsibility if it did. "I'm not covering the cost of damages for you again," I said firmly. "That's just not fair to me." There was a long, weighted pause on the other end of the line, and for a brief moment, I allowed myself to hope that maybe, just maybe, Anna was starting to understand my perspective. I could almost hear the gears turning in her head, and I waited, ready for what I thought might be the first sign of an apology or acknowledgement. But what came next left me completely stunned. "Okay," she said, her tone unnervingly casual, "why don't you just give us $300 up front? That way, if the kids break or damage anything, we can just buy a replacement or pay for repairs right away. You won't have to worry about it at all." For a second, I was sure I had misheard her. My brain scrambled to process her words, but the sheer audacity of what she had just suggested left me momentarily speechless. When it finally sank in, I couldn't help but laugh, one of those sharp, disbelieving laughs that bubbles out when you're hit with something so ridiculous that your brain has no other way to react. "You want me to give you $300, I said, emphasizing each word, "to cover damages your kids might cause in my house?" I repeated it slowly, hoping that hearing it aloud would make her realize how absurd it sounded. But Anna didn't miss a beat. "Exactly," she said, her voice steady, as if this were the most logical and fair solution in the world. She said it so matter-of-factly that for a split second, I wondered if this was some kind of elaborate joke. Surely she couldn't be serious. But the longer she talked, the clearer it became that she was dead serious. She dove into a detailed explanation of why her proposal made so much sense, for her, at least. With $300 in hand, she explained, they wouldn't have to bother me about any potential issues. If something was broken, stained, or damaged, they could just handle it right away without the need for awkward conversations or delays. "It makes everything so much easier," she said, her tone practically dripping with self-assurance, as if she were doing me a massive favor by offering to manage damages with my own money. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Not only was she refusing to take responsibility for her kids' behavior, but she was actually asking me to foot the bill for any potential damages in advance. She was framing it as a solution to my problem, when in reality, all it did was shift the burden entirely onto me. It was insulting, honestly, and I couldn't hold back the laughter that bubbled up again. The sheer audacity of it was almost impressive. I told her flat out that her suggestion was absurd. The words came out sharper than I intended, but I didn't care anymore. I'm not giving you $300 of my own money so you can cover damages your kids might cause in my house, I said, my voice steady despite the storm of frustration building inside me. If anything, you should be the one setting aside money for damages, not me. This is my home, you're the guest. The words hung in the air for a moment, and I could practically hear her disbelief on the other end of the line, like she couldn't fathom why I wasn't immediately agreeing to her ludicrous plan. Anna, unsurprisingly, didn't see it that way. Without missing a beat, she launched into another explanation, doubling down on her point as though repeating it would somehow make it sound less ridiculous. She argued that her proposal wasn't unreasonable, that, in fact, it was the most logical solution for everyone involved. She claimed that having the $300 upfront would streamline the entire visit, allowing her to deal with any incidents immediately instead of involving me in the process. It would just make things easier, she said, her tone laced with the kind of faux reasonableness that only made me angrier. Of course, by easier, she clearly meant easier for her, because the entire plan revolved around her avoiding responsibility for her own family's behavior. What truly set me off was the way she framed it as though she were doing me a favor. I'd take care of everything, she said, as if that somehow justified the fact that she was expecting me to fund her negligence. She presented it as though I should be relieved, even grateful, that she would handle any issues her kids caused, with my money. It was so blatantly self-serving that I couldn't believe she had the audacity to say it with a straight face. The entitlement in her voice was almost overwhelming, as if she genuinely thought I should consider her suggestion a perfectly reasonable compromise. The more she talked, the angrier I became. I could feel the heat rising in my chest, my grip tightening on the phone as I listened to her go on and on about how much simpler this would make things. But the simplicity she was so eager to achieve was entirely for her benefit, not mine. She wasn't interested in meeting me halfway or taking any real responsibility for her family's actions. Instead, she wanted to shift the burden entirely onto me, financially, emotionally, and practically. It was as though she believed her convenience should outweigh my peace of mind, my boundaries, and the sanctity of my home. Every word she said only reinforced how little regard she had for me or the effort I'd put into creating a space that felt safe and comfortable. It wasn't just the suggestion itself that infuriated me, it was the blatant disregard for my feelings and my position in all of this. She didn't seem to care that this was my home, that I had worked for years to afford it, and that I was already going out of my way to even consider hosting her family after what happened the last time. To her, my concerns were trivial, my boundaries were unnecessary, and my refusal to cater to her demands was nothing more than an inconvenience. It was as if she believed I owed her this, as though the fact that we were family gave her the right to treat my home like a hotel and me like the concierge. Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore. I cut her off mid-sentence, my voice firmer now, leaving no room for debate. Anna, this is not going to happen, I said, enunciating each word carefully. Either you accept the conditions I've already laid out, or you'll have to make other arrangements. Those are your options. I'm not budging on this. My tone left no doubt that the discussion was over, but even as I said the words, I could feel the tension radiating through my body. It wasn't easy standing up to her like this, but I knew I had to. If I gave in now, I'd be setting a precedent that she could walk all over me whenever it suited her. That's when she dropped the facade of fake patience and shifted back to anger. It was like a switch flipped in her tone, the forced calmness replaced by barely contained rage. She accused me of being selfish, her voice rising with every word as she hurled insult after insult my way. She called me cold and ungrateful, accusing me of prioritizing my precious house over my family. You're ruining Christmas, she said, her words sharp and cutting. You're being so inflexible over something as stupid as boundaries. It's like you don't even care about anyone but yourself. But at this point, I was too angry to care. I let her rant, waiting for her to get it all out, my grip on the phone tightening with every passing second. When she finally paused, I took a deep breath and responded as calmly as I could manage. If this is such a problem for you, I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me, then maybe you should look into a hotel or consider staying home this year. My words were simple, but the finality in my tone left no room for argument. I wasn't going to let her guilt me into backing down. I had made my decision, and no amount of yelling or name-calling was going to change that. She was furious. I could hear the anger in her voice as she sputtered a few more insults, calling me selfish and greedy, before finally hanging up. I couldn't believe how far she was willing to go to avoid taking responsibility for her own family. The entitlement, the audacity, the complete lack of respect, it was mind-boggling. But as frustrated as I was, I also felt a strange sense of relief. I had stood my ground, and no matter what happened next, I wasn't going to let her guilt me into backing down.